November 1964. Washington, D.C. Martin Luther King Jr. has just been awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. He is 35 years old, the youngest person ever to receive it. He is at the peak of his public influence, recognized by the international community as the moral conscience of the American civil rights movement. 2 weeks after the Nobel announcement, a package arrives at the Southern Christian Leadership Conference offices addressed to King. Inside is a letter and an audio recording. The letter is anonymous. It begins by telling King that he is a fraud. It describes him as an immoral man whose personal life does not match his public image. It tells him the enclosed recording is evidence that will be released to the press and to his wife unless he acts. Then it tells him what to do about it. The letter says, "King, there is only one thing left for you to do. You know what it is. You have just 34 days in which to do it." This exact number has been selected for a specific reason. It has definite practical significance. You are done. The letter is a suicide note written for someone else. Written by agents of the Federal Bureau of Investigation and authorized at the highest levels of the organization. Sent to a Nobel Peace Prize laureate to pressure him into killing himself before the recording could be made public. Martin Luther King Jr. did not act on the letter. He showed it to colleagues. He understood where it came from. He kept working. What he could not have fully understood in 1964, what most Americans would not understand for another decade, was the scale of the program that produced that letter. The letter was not an aberration. It was a tactic, one of hundreds deployed by a secret FBI program called COINTELPRO that spent 15 years conducting a covert war against American citizens on American soil. This is that story. The Federal Bureau of Investigation launches COINTELPRO, the counterintelligence program, in August 1956. The stated justification is the perceived threat of the American Communist Party to domestic security during the early Cold War. Edgar Hoover, who has run the FBI since 1924 and will run it until his death in 1972, presents the program internally as a defensive measure, disrupting foreign influence subversion before it can threaten American institutions. What COINTELPRO actually becomes is something with no precedent in American law enforcement history. A systematic, secret, long-running program to surveil, infiltrate, discredit, and destroy individuals and organizations that Hoover personally determines are threats to what he calls the American way of life. The program's methods are not investigation. They are not law enforcement. They are political warfare conducted in secret against American citizens using the full institutional resources of the federal government. Hoover is not accountable to a court for these operations. He is not accountable to Congress. COINTELPRO is classified above the knowledge of most elected officials, including many who sit on committees that technically oversee the FBI. He is not fully accountable to the sitting president. Hoover has served under 8 presidents by the time COINTELPRO begins, and his files on the personal lives of elected officials give him a leverage that makes most politicians reluctant to challenge him directly. He runs COINTELPRO for 15 years. Almost nobody outside the program knows it exists. The targets expand steadily from the program's 1956 origins. The Communist Party of the United States, the Socialist Workers' Party, various far-left organizations in the late 1950s and early 1960s. Then, as the civil rights movement grows in visibility and influence through the early 1960s, Hoover turns the full apparatus of COINTELPRO toward a new primary target: Black political organizations and their leaders. Hoover's internal memos from this period are specific about his objectives. He wants to prevent what he calls the rise of a Black Messiah, a single unifying figure who could consolidate Black political power into a movement that the establishment cannot control. He identifies Malcolm X, Martin Luther King Jr., and Stokely Carmichael as the 3 most dangerous individuals in the country from this perspective, not because they are violent, but because they are influential. The program eventually targets over 2,000 individuals and more than 300 organizations. It targets the Black Panther Party, the Nation of Islam, the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, the Puerto Rican Independence Movement, the American Indian Movement, and eventually anti-Vietnam War organizations, and what the FBI internally labels the New Left. The breadth of targeting means COINTELPRO is not a program against violent extremism. It is a program against political dissent. The methods COINTELPRO employs are designed to destroy, without leaving the fingerprints of the FBI on the destruction. Anonymous letters sent to the wives and employers of targeted individuals, containing fabricated or selectively true information about personal behavior, financial irregularities, or political associations, designed to end marriages, terminate employment, and isolate targets from their support networks. Fake publications and forged documents circulated within targeted organizations, designed to create internal suspicion, trigger internal purges, and fracture organizational unity. The FBI manufactures letters purportedly from one black nationalist leader to another, containing insults or accusations designed to escalate tensions between organizations into open conflict. Infiltrators, paid FBI informants placed inside targeted organizations who do not merely observe and report, but actively participate in organizational decisions, encourage illegal activity to create prosecution opportunities, and in some cases act as agents provocateurs to trigger violence. Tax investigations coordinated with the IRS against targeted individuals. Immigration investigations coordinated with other federal agencies. Media plants. FBI agents cultivating relationships with journalists and editors to place negative stories about targeted individuals, with the Bureau's involvement never disclosed. The specific human cost of these methods is impossible to fully calculate because the operations were designed to look like natural consequences rather than government action. A marriage that ends, a career that collapses, an organization that fractures from within. None of these leave a visible FBI fingerprint. That is the point. The most extreme domestic application of COINTELPRO methods occurs on December 4, 1969, in Chicago. Fred Hampton is 21 years old. He is the chairman of the Illinois chapter of the Black Panther Party, a gifted organizer who has built a multiracial coalition in Chicago that includes Puerto Rican street gangs and poor white organizations alongside black community groups. FBI internal memos from this period identify Hampton specifically as a potential unifying figure, exactly the profile Hoover has identified as the program's primary threat. The FBI's Chicago field office has placed an informant named William O'Neill inside Hampton's organization. O'Neill rises to become Hampton's personal bodyguard and chief of security. He provides the FBI with detailed floor plans of Hampton's apartment. At 4:45 in the morning on December 4th, 14 Chicago police officers, acting on FBI intelligence and in coordination with the FBI's COINTELPRO operation, raid Hampton's apartment. In the raid that follows, Fred Hampton is shot twice in the head at close range while lying in his bed. He is killed in his sleep. A fellow Panther, Mark Clark, is also killed. The initial police account claims officers acted in self-defense against a sustained attack from inside the apartment. A subsequent investigation by a special prosecutor finds that approximately 99 shots are fired in the raid, 98 of them by police. One shot is fired from inside the apartment. A federal civil rights lawsuit filed by Hampton's family is settled in 1982 for $1.85 million, paid by the city of Chicago, Cook County, and the federal government. The settlement is made without any admission of wrongdoing. Fred Hampton's family never receives a formal government acknowledgement of what actually happened in that apartment. The Martin Luther King Jr. surveillance operation runs for years before the 1964 suicide letter and continues after it. The FBI begins monitoring King in the late 1950s, initially citing concerns about communist associations in his advisory circle. By the early 1960s, the operation expands to comprehensive surveillance, phone taps, hotel room bugs placed during his travels, physical surveillance, and a network of informants inside his organizations. The audio recordings the 1964 letter references are real. The FBI has been recording King's private conversations in hotel rooms during his travels. The content Hoover believes he has is personal in nature. Hoover is personally obsessed with King to a degree that goes beyond institutional concern. Internal memos show Hoover describing King in language that his own deputies find excessive. The suicide letter is drafted by FBI agent William Sullivan. It is reviewed and approved at senior levels of the Bureau. It is sent to King's office, addressed to King personally. When the letter is eventually made public through the Church Committee hearings in the 1970s and later fully declassified, it is described by historians as one of the most shocking documents in the history of American law enforcement. A government agency charged with protecting citizens sending a suicide note to a Nobel Peace Prize winner. The letter sits today in the National Archives in Washington, D.C. It is fully available to the public. COINTELPRO ends, officially, not because of a congressional investigation or a presidential order, but because of a break-in. On March 8, 1971, a group of 8 activists calling themselves the Citizens Commission to investigate the FBI break into an FBI field office in Media, Pennsylvania. They take every file in the office, approximately 1,000 documents, and mail copies to journalists and members of Congress. Most news organizations initially refused to publish the documents, citing national security concerns. The Washington Post publishes them. What the documents reveal: the existence of COINTELPRO, its methods, its targets, its scope, triggers a public and political crisis that Hoover cannot manage. Hoover shuts down the formal COINTELPRO program in April 1971, 1 month after the media break-in. He dies in May 1972. The program that bore his vision dies with him, officially. The Church Committee's 1975 investigation into intelligence abuses formally documents COINTELPRO's existence and methods and produces the most comprehensive public accounting of the program to date. The committee's final report concludes that COINTELPRO operations were a secret war against those citizens it considered threats to the established order, conducted entirely outside the law, without judicial oversight, and without the knowledge of the elected officials who were supposed to be overseeing the agencies that ran it. In the years that follow, a series of executive orders and legislative reforms attempt to constrain domestic intelligence operations. The FBI is prohibited from conducting surveillance of domestic organizations without specific criminal predicate. New oversight requirements are established. Guidelines are written. Whether those guidelines fully resolve the institutional culture that produced COINTELPRO is a question that historians, civil liberties advocates, and the communities that were targeted continue to debate today. Go back to that letter. November 1964. A Nobel Peace Prize winner at 35 years old, opening a package that contains a recording and a note telling him he has 34 days to kill himself. The man who authorized that letter ran the Federal Bureau of Investigation for 48 years, longer than any director before or since. He served under 8 presidents. He was never elected. He was never meaningfully challenged while he was alive. COINTELPRO targeted over 2,000 Americans. It destroyed careers, fractured organizations, facilitated violence, and in at least one documented case in Chicago, helped end a 21-year-old man's life in his own bed while he slept. The program ran for 15 years before 8 ordinary citizens broke into an office in a small Pennsylvania town and mailed the files to a newspaper. That is how it ended. Not with accountability, not with a trial, with a break-in and a newspaper. That is what was declassified. Subscribe, because the next file is already open.